Force. What I was asked to do today was address both where we were from U.S. Cyber Command as components and also to address where we stand today as 25th Air Force in terms of ISR for and from cyber. So from the U.S. Cybercom perspective, it's been a pretty rapid transformation over the last few years, which has been enabled by a change in, first you've all heard the discussion of the National Defense Strategy, which expects us to compete, but it expects us to compete in all domains. And clearly an area where we're in constant engagement with our adversaries and constant contact is within the cyber domain. So not only do we have the NDS, but there are a couple other significant things that has changed the environment for cyberspace operations and enabling multi-domain. One of those was a change in the law in 2019 for the National Defense Authorization Act that made cyber a domain of traditional military activity. Really began to start pushing the department to look at ways to also look at the cognitive side of this portion of the conflict. The other was the DoD cyber strategy that set an expectation for engagement with our adversaries within the cyber domain. Cyber National Mission Force is the element within Cyber Command that is responsible for going after the adversary's hackers, both offensive and defense. And what I have seen as one of the biggest sets of transformation, in addition to authorities and the policy, has been the talent that is growing within the services. And as a joint commander, I gained the great benefit of the work that AF Cyber was doing to present us a force of airmen, both cyber and ISR, that we could now employ and engage our adversaries in different ways than we've ever done in the past. So able to take questions from a CNMF perspective, but as we've already discussed, pending Senate confirmation, we'll establish a new information warfare NAV. But what General Holmes has already charged 24th and 25th Air Force to do is set the conditions for that. And where we're seeing as really strong possibilities as 25th Air Force, as the organization that executes global ISR, as well as electronic warfare, and presents those capabilities to all the air components and executes in support of COCOMs, we're seeing dots connect across missions, across 25th and 24th, that are going to enable intelligence to support cyber operations and generate new possibilities, both in the cyber domain but also cognitively, as well as what can we do within the cyber domain to now inform decisions in all the other domains to produce outcomes. So there's a lot of opportunity space, and we'll welcome any questions on that.
I guess I'm the oddball. So my name is David Brumley. I'm a professor at Carnegie Mellon University. I'm also CEO of a startup called ForAllSecure. And the thing that really drew me to this panel is this idea that I think the job of academia and also startups is to help support everyone in their mission here. So everyone has talked about the workforce development problem. Thank you for recognizing it. It's actually hard everywhere. It's not just in the Air Force. And one of the problems that we have is when you look at young men and women, people in high school, they still don't necessarily know cyber is a career field. And so things like Cyber Patriot, at CMU we run PICO CTF, things that expose them to this career field are the first big step, because if you don't know it exists, you can't do it. I think the second component is to grow new original research. And so a lot of the research, when you look at things like AI or machine learning or all these hot topics, it's really, to me, about autonomy. We know that cyber moves fast. And having someone walk a piece of paper from one division to the other is just a recipe for disaster and to lose. We have to make those sort of quick decisions and be able to act on them at internet or cyber speeds. And so in 2016, DARPA shined a light on this with their Cyber Grand Challenge. It was like the self-driving car of computer security. And through organizations in the DoD, such as DIU, there's starting to be transition of those into the services, including the Air Force. And so that's the first big thing, is not just driving for cyber speed, but saying autonomy is the way to do it, and doing the research development, and not just stopping at that initial prototype, but making it usable for the warfighter is the second thing. I think that the third thing that we can do is just offer understanding, coming from an academic or an enterprise background, that the mission inside the DoD and in the Air Force is especially difficult because you have accountability to every US citizen. I only have accountability to shareholders or to the dean in my professor role, much easier than every US citizen. And so I think we need to think about how we can foster that understanding that working with the DoD is not just good, but also understand their problems so that when we're designing solutions, we can work within those constraints and not just saying those are artificial or, it's just a bunch of red tape, but they're often there for a reason, and understanding that and then working with people to address the root things that we need to address that were articulated by the 6 stars to my right.
Very good. Well, lady and gentlemen, we've got far more questions than we'll ever get to here, but I'll direct the first one to you, General Jamieson. And it involves the differences in acquiring major weapons platforms and acquiring cyber systems and cyber services. What do you see as the challenges in building the FIDEP, in articulating requirements, and in getting support on Capitol Hill for the things that our Air Force needs in the cyber domain, particularly as it differs from major weapons platforms?
Thank you so much for giving me the kickoff softball question. Really, how are we going to acquire capabilities in the future that are secure from cyber vulnerabilities? And then how are we going to convince the populace, because that's really who Capitol Hill is representing, that we need to invest in that kind of security? That's the question I heard.
Sure.
And I think that in some degrees, the people and Congress are already with us. We have heard about how many times individuals have had their accounts, their bank accounts hacked, how they have had the security, the new security systems in their homes vulnerable to attack, how their children, when they're on the internet, are very vulnerable to predators. So I think we already have a great understanding with Capitol Hill and the American people on why we need cybersecurity. We just need to be a little more specific and articulate with our industry partners that the vulnerabilities cannot exist. And we have to team and work this together. We have to come up with protecting the data on our weapon systems and not just the internal working systems of those weapons systems. Because now, as General Goldfein talked about yesterday, it is all about our software. So if we take a look at the F-35, it isn't just the platform that's vulnerable, it's that fusion engine and all the data that it contains. And we're working very closely with General Bunch, who's in room C right now having a panel, who would say with their CROW's office and with our mission defense teams that we are looking to standardize our crews, standardize our training, and standardize our tool work. We will be able to rapidly get after the magnitude of this problem, properly articulate to our corporate process just how vulnerable we are in certain aspects and maybe not so much in others as we look to protecting our capabilities. Because unless we protect our power projection platforms, we really don't have them. So I look at it like that, and I think that once we understand, we've been doing a cyber review just like the Navy has done, just like the Army is doing, and we're about to brief that out here shortly to the Deputy Secretary of Defense on our capabilities and how we're going to get after them. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, ma'am. General Haugh, I'll direct this question at you, and it involves SCADA, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition Systems. What do you see as the challenges of the nexus as it's represented right now between us, the Department of Defense, and civil authorities, other law enforcement agencies, intelligence gathering agencies? How secure do you feel right now that we're sharing what we should be sharing and that we've got the processes in place? Because every system in the Air Force is vulnerable to infrastructure interruptions.
So that's an area that is a really good question, and it's an area that we spent a lot of time in the Cyber National Mission Force, and it was General Noxoni's effort to execute Pathfinder projects that would be done between the department and Homeland Security and the Department of Energy. Because there are a lot of experts that are working these challenges, it's how we're able to communicate. And so a couple different things that went on to start to move that into a place where we could share data. One of those is there is a series of councils that DOE runs, that DOE or that the Department of Defense had traditionally participated in through our installation side of DoD. Now we've added to ensure that we're bringing cyber experts to that. And it's an engagement with all the CEOs across the country inside the energy sector, starting to be able to share what we've learned from our operations with them through DOE. The second is that Cyber Command began to expose adversary capabilities directly to cybersecurity industry. So publicly releasing capabilities that they had collected through defensive operations and other operations, and then passing it to industry. Because really where the power in cybersecurity is in our nation is through the private sector and through the expertise that exists there, and also their global presence. So by Cyber Command exposing adversary capabilities, it allowed the cybersecurity industry to more rapidly deploy countermeasures against those. That included the energy sector in specific capabilities that were identified. So that's a lot of work. Inside the Air Force, that's a partnership across a series of organizations that are looking at it from installations, civil engineering, and also is certainly an area from a cyber investment perspective.
Thank you. Dr. Brumley, General Jamieson in her opening comments talked briefly about the speed of cyber, and she used the word integrate 4 times in her opening comments. What do you see as the challenges from the other side of the transom, from our friends in industry and our friends in academia, with respect to what we're doing right in the Department of Defense, what we might improve on in adapting to this speed of cyber, given our legacy acquisition processes?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So there's really, speed of cyber means 2 different things. One is when you're engaged in combat, how quickly can you react? The second is, as you're trying to maintain these systems, how quickly can you update when there's a new vulnerability? It's really the second one that talks on acquisition, and that's often the root of the problems that we have today. So I never think personally of systems either secure or insecure. I think about, do I operate with speed enough to win? So we engage in mock battles and DEFCON CTF and we win because we're faster than anyone else at, when we're recognizing a new vulnerability, fielding it. And so I think there's the technology behind that, things like the DARPA Cyber Gun Challenge and Project Voltron to do it, but it also has to change in acquisitions. We have to stop doing waterfall requirements where it's like you're gonna have to follow this particular process, because you know what? Next year, people are gonna still think about new cyber vulnerabilities. They're gonna come up with Rowhammer, Meltdown, Spectre, and you're gonna have to adapt to those, and you can't wait 20 years to field the next system that adapts to it. So I think one of the big challenges is everyone's on the same page, but how do we change the process from when something was specified 2 years ago to what we know today, to make sure today actually not just the DoD is getting the best, but even the contractor building it, they need line items that they can say this is meeting that requirements. So it's like a whole process that needs to be updated throughout the acquisition.
Thank you. General Pyburn, in your flight plan, which I'm excited to read, I truly am, I'm eager to do that as soon as I can. Talk to us briefly about the human component in there, particularly career field mergers, especially in the enlisted track. What do you think the challenges are that you're going to confront in executing that flight plan? And can you talk specifically about plans for future or planned mergers in enlisted career fields in particular?
Yeah, that's something on the enlisted side. It's something that we're taking a look at right now. And broadly, and I think it's been acknowledged, it's not just the Air Force or DoD, it's industry. It's how do we recruit the talent? And we talked about Cyber Patriot, but you know, everyone thinks recruiting is Air Force Recruiting Service, and that happens on a planet far away. Everybody in this room is a recruiter. We're all recruiters. And when we have a chance to engage at a school, or at a community event, and represent the United States Air Force and talk about the opportunities that we have in the Department of Defense and the great mission and the amazing folks you're going to get to work with. The rest of that ought to be about and how we're going to develop you as an airman, as a cyberspace operator with, as General Jamieson talked about in MDTs, but it's broader than that. What is our deliberate, specified training path? On the officer side, as we talked about, we have cyberspace effects operators and we have warfighting communicators. And those are 2 fundamental pieces in our Air Force that are absolutely essential to winning. If you don't have warfighting communicators that can build, architect, design resilient, capable global command and control networks, we're not going to win. If we don't have cyberspace operators that can defend our capabilities and project power, we're not going to win. The SecDef said it this morning, the first shot is probably going to happen in cyberspace and space. So we have to be ready for that. How do we develop that talent? How do we retain that talent? And there are some initiatives that may be considered with regards to, I think the Army is taking a look at some incentive pay things, and we're having those conversations, but not to get ahead of the plan and the team. Part of the plan is to have the conversation as a community about how do we get to right? How do we retain and develop the talent that we need? So the officer side, we have a good path forward. On the enlisted side, we're continuing that evaluation and that conversation. But at the end of the day, we want to recruit, retain, and develop the talent, and ideally keep them as long as they're willing to stay. And something else we have to think through, and this is a broader perspective I would offer, is you may have an airman or young officer that, 4 or 8 years into their journey, they make a decision for family reasons, for other reasons, and there's a great opportunity in industry, and there's nothing wrong with that. They've already served their nation. But there's an opportunity to maybe to go into the reserves or the Guard and continue to serve. And wouldn't it be great if we had a way for folks to come back in? If it was easy, if somebody went to Google or Amazon and did great things and missed the calling, missed the opportunities in the Air Force, missed being part of this team, wouldn't it be great if it was just easy for them to come back? Those are the kinds of things we have to think about.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here because we also are looking at things not just for our specific cyber warfighters. We actually have launched, with the help of A1 and MR, our computer language initiative, that we were able to get out surveys to our airmen to say, what coding capability do you already possess? And let's look at evaluating what really is ground truth on, are they HTML or are they really a Python coder? And now we're taking that to the next step, because we have some of our data, is how do we resource, incentivize, train, and equip them to do that? It is not limited just to our cyber operators. We open that up to the entire Air Force. When we took a look at our 17 career field and we came up with our S and our Delta, we also have a Z. And our Z is a software coder. And it's not just available for our 17s. We've also opened that up to our engineering fields, our 6X career field, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're also looking at opening up that to other career fields, because we have to look at the digital age is different. Skill sets are different. The Air Force has to be different. And I'm going to tie in General Haugh on this one, because Cyber Command is actually looking at identifying new and different skill sets based off of what we've learned as we've conducted live operations around the globe. Tim, I'm just going to throw it to you to kind of highlight how Cybercom is really looking at what we thought 7 years ago for skill sets is not where we're at today. And thank God it's not. We are evolving our tactics, techniques, and procedures, and we're listening to our warfighting element, our COCOM, on how and what skills they need to actually warfight.
And I think what we've really found in terms of conducting operations, one, we've got to be very flexible in the type of kit that we give to the force that allows them to adapt really quickly. And when we do, when we empower that force and we give them the opportunity, they're now able to apply skills and get after our adversary. The areas where we're seeing more and more as the catalyst is that partnership between ISR and cyber, as to where that really becomes an area where there's significant overlap in some of the skills that we need to be able to really understand what an adversary is doing, rapidly adapt and pursue. That is an area where we can look at some very common things. Many of those come back to the ability to do some scripting, the ability to understand and pull data in, rapidly analyze that data. And then we know that we're going to need every element of that force to understand how to handle analytics. So that whether you're on the defensive side, whether you're looking at it from an offensive perspective, or that you're operating from a warfighter comm perspective, you got to really understand what's happening in the environment. So that will be an area that we'll see investment. And the very analogous side from an intel professional is, if we're going to compete in the information environment, then we're going to need experts to be able to handle publicly available information and integrate that rapidly into our operations. So those are areas, and I'll touch on one last thing that I think is also, from our workforce perspective, as we look at those professionals, our airmen, our NCOs, our officers, and our civilians, we want to employ them. We want them on the battlefield. So one of the challenges that we've had is ensuring that we get them all clearances. And so one of the initiatives that General Bryan started as 25th Air Force Commander in close partnership with the Air Force Recruiting Service is to go all the way back to the beginning to make sure that we're identifying the right talent that's going to be clearable. And now 26% of those airmen that need security clearances coming out of basic military training are leaving BMT approved for a clearance. And that's hard work across our service so that we can take this talent and immediately employ it when it hits our operational force.
I'd like to add just one thing. Yes. Definitely. I think one thing that I didn't hear, but one thing we found effective, and I think I've seen this in the Air Force, but you didn't mention it, is cross-training. You can't do defense unless you understand offense techniques. You can't do offense if you don't understand defense techniques. So this idea that, hey, you're a defensive guy only, you're just going to get owned all day long because you don't understand what the attacker's actually doing. And I think there's been a recognition of this. And it's starting to build out as part of the curriculum that you have to cross-train across these different roles. That doesn't mean the defense person is doing an offense mission. It just means he has to be aware of those techniques. And one way to do that is to practice them in closed, safe environments. Things like Cyber Patriot do this at the high school level, and then the CNMF has their own setups to do these sort of things as well. So I just wanted to call that out as a really important component.
Thank you all. General Jamieson, you're a trailblazer, bringing A2 and A6 together and making this work. A member of our audience would like to know, do you see this extending to the MAGCOM level? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
I think it already has. ACC with General Holmes is leading the integration of 25th and 24th Air Force. And it's about how do you execute this integrated capability. I think General Haugh has actually highlighted the relationship, the intersection, the synergies of different skill sets, training, and opportunity. You actually have to know patterns of the adversary. You have to know where the adversary is. You have to have insights on the adversary, what ISR brings to the table. And you have to be able to take action to do it. A lot of times the difference between what ISR for cyber operations airmen are doing and what cyber warfare operators are doing really rests in one keystroke. So we have to look at, from an execution standpoint, from what ACC is starting to do of integrating those NAFs is actually empowering and emboldening that integration. But I don't want to just talk about that. I think we also have touched around, and some of us have mentioned, this is a waypoint. It isn't just about integrating ISR and cyber operations. We have heard extensively about our contested information or influence operations or hybrid warfare or gray zone operations that our adversary, our competitors, are actually conducting every day. We are in a persistent engagement environment today, and we have to integrate ISR, cyber warfare, electronic warfare, and information operations to actually identify and come up with what do we do, what do we mean, how do we train, and what tools are required for information warfare. Because out of all of the domains today, every day around the globe, in cyberspace, we are at conflict. We aren't just in competition, we are in conflict. And the Vice and the Chief talked about our intellectual property is just being ripped off from us. That is conflict. So I look at that and I go, it's not just about a MAGCOM integrating. It's about our entire evolution of how are we conducting warfare and where are we going with information warfare for tomorrow. I don't know, Tim, pending confirmation, you might have some other aspects, and then I'd like for Brad to be able to talk about some things that are in the flight plan, because we have an annex on information warfare in the flight plan.
So ma'am, I'll speak from an ISR perspective in terms of one of the areas that really is kind of builds on some of the things that I talked about with what Cyber Command did to expose adversary capabilities. So as we do that, enabling shining light on malign activity and being then to expose that across the world. What does that look like in an ISR enterprise that's competing in the information environment? That is focused on generating outcomes in addition to informing commanders at all levels. So is there opportunity for us within our ISR enterprise to expose adversary activity, bring it to the light of day, so that now we can show our allies, our partners, what really specifically China and Russia are doing as malign activity on a more routine basis, and enabling that discussion for COCOMs and for air components.
Before I turn it to you, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Brad.
I was just going to add, so as General Jamieson said, we do talk briefly about this need to pivot to information warfare in the flight plan. And what are the tangible things we can begin to do as an Air Force to build this out and to make it real, to support the new NAF as it integrates and stands up? And there's some pretty basic building blocks. So we have these individual disciplines that you've heard mentioned of ISR and electronic warfare, cyberspace operations, and information operations. How do we build depth and credibility and capability in each of those disciplines and continue to do that, which is vitally important to the Air Force? But then how do we begin, the magic really is in the integration. And how do we begin to integrate? How do we do things like, what are the training opportunities that we can begin to create and leverage that will build that connective tissue? What are the concepts that we need to develop? Concepts of operations and how we might employ capabilities and operators to do the kinds of things General Haugh just mentioned. And then how do we go out and exercise and practice and wargame these concepts and these ideas and sharpen them and learn from them? That's really what we're talking about. That's what we want to have a conversation about. And if I could, ma'am, so what we would like to do, AFA was very gracious to allow us to have a room. We're going to be in Chesapeake J. We're going to have 3 different sessions this afternoon at 1400, 1500, and 1600, where we invite you to come, and we're just going to have a conversation. We just want to throw some ideas out there and listen to your thoughts on how we can make this real. Because at the end of the day, the best ideas are not on this stage. The best ideas are in our junior NCOs and our young officers and our young civilians who have these amazing creative ideas, and we want to listen to you.
It is all about information warfare. And without each and every one of you participating, you might have that one nugget that gets us that integrating piece that we all need to hear. I know, Doctor, you have talked about this when we were chatting earlier. From your side of the house, what do you see about information warfare and where we're headed? Sorry to ask the question.
Well, I think integration is the right way. So I don't think that there's boundaries between, for example, a computer IT system that you use, EW, you need ISR for information to help you be able to see what people are doing and know how they're going to react. So I think it makes a lot of sense, because when I go look at least from the enterprise sector, people aren't drawing the sort of boundaries that you would typically have in, this guy's only defense or this guy's only ISR. They don't care. I mean, the job here is not to say you did your job, it's to win. And really switching to that mindset is important.
General Jamieson, gentlemen, the message I heard clearly throughout was, let's roll up our socks and get to work. So we'd like to give you some socks that you can roll up. Thank you very much for a brilliant session.
Okay, if anybody wants to get a pamphlet on the cyber warfare flight plan, we have about 100 up here for the first eager people who want to know and want to roll up their sleeves and help us.